Dominic Tang, Society of Jesus, How Inscrutable His Ways. Memoirs, 1951 to 1981. Chapter 6, Resist America, Help Korea Campaign. This campaign was held between 1950 and 1952. While the communist troops were involved in the Korean War, China started the Resist America, Help Korea, Protect Our Homes, Defend Our Country nationwide propaganda campaign. Students stopped studying and workers stopped working. They went from door to door doing propaganda and raising funds. The domestic policy of the communists at that time was to put emphasis on the united front, i.e. united together to fight against the foreigners. The anti-religion problem was largely put aside. Religious people, especially the Catholics and Protestants, were summoned for meetings frequently, once or twice a week. Sometimes it was necessary to join their parades, with all walks of life in the city represented. The parade usually started at 8 a.m. and lasted until 4 or 5 p.m. Our Catholic representatives at the meetings for religious circles were usually Father Andreas Chan, Father Dominic Tang Kon Chiu, and Father Andrew Lin. From the large parades, the other priests were not fortunate enough to escape. One incident at such a meeting is worth recording. Once, when people from religious circles were holding a meeting at the YMCA at Cheng Tai, a leading cadre stated emphatically while making a report, "American imperialism is a paper tiger." Later, during the group discussion, a Protestant minister, Reverend Li Shenghua, said, "America has strong weapons. We cannot compare her to a paper tiger." Not long after this, the minister was sentenced to reform through labor for 3 years. The representatives of the denomination to which Reverend Li belonged asked representatives of other denominations to see the mayor together to plead for clemency, but they refused to go. The government sometimes sent fundraising collection teams from door to door. The Catholics, in order to avoid trouble and not to appear unpatriotic, donated the following items. Number 1, 50 cotton-padded garments for the volunteers, each costing 15 yuan, the total cost being 750 yuan. Originally, we were asked to donate 100, later it was reduced to 50. 2. Each priest donated 5 yuan, and I had to give a double sum, i.e. 10 yuan. 3. A second donation of the same amount as the last time. Concerning the parades, I did not join in, but neither did I stop others from going. Sometimes I even lent my own white shirt to the priests. It was necessary to put on white shirts and blue trousers for the processions. Once 3 young girls of about 16 or 17, whom I did not know, came suddenly to the parlor of the bishop's house, the second floor of the Carmelite monastery, to interview me. They asked this one question: "Bishop, is the Korean War a just war?" I answered, "I do not know whether it is just or not. You are students, and should work hard at your studies." They left our place. Later, people discovered that these 3 girls had been sent to test my attitude towards the Resist America, Help Korea movement. When I was arrested later, the cadres asked me, "Why did you not encourage people to join the army? Instead, you told them to study and held them back. You opposed the Resist America, Help Korea movement. It is lucky for you that you got no American money. That would have made things worse." Chapter 7. The To Kam Hang Orphanage Affair. In order to attack religion and promote a total anti-foreign policy, the communist government created the To Kam Hang incident, which brought persecution to our Catholic Church. There had hitherto been many poor people in China. Medical care had been backward, and the people had habitually esteemed males and despised females. Hence, every year, a lot of abandoned baby girls were sent to the To Kam Hang Orphanage in the north of Canton City. This orphanage was run by 5 Canadian Sisters of the Immaculate Conception of Montreal. As there were so many abandoned babies, sometimes very sick or dying when they reached the orphanage, quite a large number of them could not survive and eventually died. Their bodies were formerly buried by the persons in charge in the graveyard nearby. Sometimes they were not buried deep enough and were dragged out by the wild dogs. For this reason, the orphanage dug a cement pit, put the corpses inside, and covered the opening with lime for disinfection. After the liberation in 1950, the government wanted a daily report on the circumstances of the deaths, and the sisters complied. Later, the government increased the number of deaths and accused the sisters of ill-treating and killing many babies. The sisters wanted to see me, so I went to the convent of the Holy Spirit School to meet them. They told me about the trouble, and I advised them to be pleasant with the cadres and not to be arrogant. However, I told them to stick to the facts and not to accept the charge of killing the babies. Not long after the communists had taken over China, from 1949 to 1950, throughout the whole country from north to south they stirred up an anti-Catholic movement. Foreign missionaries and sisters were expelled. Educational and charitable institutions of the church, schools, orphanages, hospitals, and so on were confiscated. They invented all sorts of crimes to achieve the purpose of their dark plots to destroy the church. The To Kam Hang Orphanage, like the other orphanages in the country, was slandered by the communists as proof of the crimes of the imperialist invasion of China. The sisters of the orphanage were falsely accused of being murderers of infants. The communist government used the mass media, including all the large radio stations of the whole country, and newspapers everywhere, to portray the Catholic sisters, who were usually well loved and respected by the Chinese, as imperialistic murderers who wear the cloak of religion. They arrested 5 Canadian sisters of the To Kam Hang Orphanage, took over all the property of the orphanage, and called for a public trial in the Chungshang Memorial Hall, the biggest conference hall of the city. They forced all organizations and groups, schools and residents to send representatives to participate in the trial. They even arranged all the accusations beforehand and broadcasted the public trial on the radio to the whole city. Father Gerard H. Casey, Society of Jesus, tried to bring Holy Communion to the sisters after they had been arrested, but did not succeed. It was important not only to visit them, but to bring them spiritual nourishment to strengthen them. On the day of the public trial of the 5 sisters, to avoid being brought to it by the government, I went early in the morning to the Po Kong Church, Ho Nam, Father Augustine Wong Ming Chu's place. I listened in on the radio to the events of the public trial. Father Narbaeus went personally to the trial and told us what happened afterwards. It was like a play. Father Richard Kennedy, Society of Jesus, made 2 efforts to get in, but was turned back because he had no pass. After the trial, the 5 sisters were immediately put in a big lorry and escorted around the city under guard, with a few police cars in front and behind them. They were treated like extremely vicious criminals, being dragged out in public as punishment. The sisters were not allowed to put on their religious habits, only Chinese-style black shirts and trousers. On the way, some people deliberately threw stones and rubbish at them. Sister Germaine Gravel was so wounded that her face was covered with blood. They were put in custody for a period of time, and as they were Canadians, they were expelled. The government then ordered that people of all levels in the city, schools, and organizations be organized to pay visits to the To Kam Hang Orphanage. The government also summoned priests for meetings and tried to force them to accuse the sisters, but not even one priest turned up. The cadres wanted Father Andreas Chang, Vicar General of the diocese, to denounce the crimes of the sisters on the radio, but he also refused. After the sisters had returned to Hong Kong, I wrote to them through Father Narbeus, thanking them for suffering so much for the diocese and for praying for us in prison, which had secured the preservation of our diocese. They replied, "It is not you who should thank us, but we who should thank you for praying for us so that we could leave safely." When they went back to Canada, their cardinal, His Eminence, Paul-Émile Lager, came to the airport to welcome them and accompanied them in an open car back to their convent. During my visit to Canada in 1983, I met some of the sisters who had been detained by the Chinese communists. We joyfully thank God for His great grace in practicing us in bearing suffering. Chapter 8. Land Reform Movement. Not long after the land reform campaign had started, the parish priest of To Kam Hang, Father Anthony Leng Pin Kin, was arrested and denounced by some farmers. They asked him to return rent and deposits. Father Lueng insisted that, ever since World War II, the church had never collected rent for the fields. Father Lueng also said, "You are so enthusiastic in fighting against landlords. Are you hoping to get some profit from it?" Finally, they detained him and he was in jail for 5 years. When the diocese got the news, we sent Father Andrew Lin and Father Aleosius Yip to Sha Ho Detention Center to bail him out. Father Lueng spent 5 years in reform by labor and was released about the beginning of 1955. Most of the farmers in To Kam Hang, a good 40 in number, were Catholics. Led by the land reform working team, they marched threateningly to the bishop's house to ask for the return of rent and profit. The matter was declared settled only after they got what they wanted. There were in all about 100 Catholics in To Kam Hang. Most of them had moved in during the 20s from Pok Lo County. At that time, seeing that they had no means of livelihood, the church built more than 30 one-story houses near the parish church and bought more than 70 mu of paddy fields for them and helped them to settle down. In order to preserve its right to the property, the church asked them to pay a small rent each year. As we know, ever since before the Sino-Japanese War, for more than 10 years the church had not collected any rent. However, a year before liberation, some of them took the initiative to pay a token rent. And this was what they meant when they asked for the return of rent. At that time, I discussed with Father Omiara the government's policy of confiscating the property of the landlords. Both of us felt that the Catholics should not take the property of the landlords unless it was sold through public auction. I talked to individual priests privately about this. For this, I was accused of the crime of sabotaging the land reform movement. Father Francis Louis Ming Kong worked in Sangshin, Ko Po Canton, and in Tungshan Canton, in the old people's home at Mui Fa village. After the liberation, he was transferred back to his native place to serve in the parish of Lungnan of Shuntak district. He had inherited about 3 mu of land. Hence, during the land reform period, he was classified as a landlord by the Peasant Association. He was struggled against, exposed, criticized, and forced to return both rent and interest. Moreover, he was under surveillance and had neither freedom of speech nor freedom of movement. He had to work in the fields for his living and suffered his fill of ill treatment. He died in his own home in Chuntak around 1961. Chapter 9. The 3 anti and 5 anti campaigns. Although the 3 anti and 5 anti campaigns were not aimed directly against the church, the tension, the fear, and the political atmosphere spread all over Canton City. All the classrooms and halls of primary and secondary schools in the city were occupied as accusation struggle centers, day and night. Capitalists, great and small, were the targets to be struggled against. Suicides were talked about all the time. The screams of accused capitalists and the shouts of working teams mingled together. Faced with such a terrible situation, different people had different reactions and their own comments. This was only natural. Once, Father Joseph Luang Yan Tak and I were standing at the window of the bishop's house facing the classroom of Ming Tak Primary School. In front of the bishop's house, capitalists were being struggled against. Watching the accusation meetings in the classrooms of Ming Tak Primary School, Father Lung said, "The business of the capitalists is legal. They pay the taxes as stipulated. But now the government has confiscated their property and struggles against them. It is not fair." I said, "Yes, that is not fair." This became the charge that I had opposed the 3 anti and 5 anti campaigns. Chapter 10. The expulsion from China of Monsignor Riberi, the Apostolic Internuncio. In 1951, around the middle of May, I went to Shanghai. The reason I gave was that I wanted, after my consecration as bishop, to see my old friends and also some priests and fellow students in the theologate. I had worked in Shanghai for 3 years after my ordination. As I had just been consecrated bishop, it was right to go there to thank my friends for their congratulations. I could not return to Hong Kong to see my mother, brothers, and other relatives. It was also my wish to go via Shanghai to Nanjing to see Monsignor Riberi as a newly consecrated bishop, but this was not possible. When the news of the expulsion of Monsignor Riberi appeared in the Canton newspapers, the cadres in Canton immediately summoned the Catholics of Lung Yan Fong and Luk Yan Fong near the cathedral to a meeting to discuss the publication of the crimes of Monsignor Riberi and to ask the Catholics to support the correct measures of the government. 2 or 3 days after the news had appeared, the government sent a notice to the Catholic priests about a meeting. After the bishop and priests had gone into the matter, we decided that the way to face the problem was to go to the meeting and say nothing. The meeting was held in a large hall in Xiamen. I remember that on the table there were refreshments, fruit, and cigarettes. The cadres were very polite. After proclaiming Monsignor Riberi's crimes, they told priests to voice their denunciation, but from the start to finish, no priest spoke. The cadres whispered. They made a united preparation beforehand. After the meeting had gone on for about 2 hours, it broke up in discord. The priests did not accuse or struggle against Monsignor Riberi. because he was the representative of the Pope,